Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are having an excellent day today. For this week's video, we're going to compare the Les Paul versus Gibson's best-selling guitar, the SG. Now, according to word on the street, the SG is supposed to be a little bit more cutting, a little bit more bright, and have a really aggressive tone. And the Les Paul, by all accounts, is a little bit warmer, a little bit more rounder overall in its tone. Is this just a myth made up by the guitar manufacturers and the retailers so that they can sell you both of these? Let's find out. Today we're going to do a riff by riff comparison of both of these guitars so that you guys can really hear the differences between them. And of course we'll throw them in a mix with other instruments as well. Alright, let's briefly talk about the interesting history between these two models, because believe it or not, they were both called Les Pauls. Now the original Les Paul, and the Les Paul as we know it, was birthed in the early 50s, beaten to the market by the Telecaster, but a couple years after, the Les Paul was introduced with P90s, and then in 1957 it got its humbuckers, and then I think in 58, 59, and 60 they had these burst finishes. Okay, and those were produced in pretty low numbers. The Les Paul wasn't a big seller. It wasn't really a bomb, but it was by no means a roaring success. They didn't sell a lot of them. They were expensive, and the burst models were an upcharge. So that's why like the 59s, which is the classic Les Paul, are so rare. Now, due to the poor sales numbers of the Les Paul, Gibson decided to do something radical. So in 1961, the new Les Paul was born. It was lighter, it was thinner, it had a really aggressive look to it with these horns. It had the upper scoop so your thumb could get all the way up to the higher frets. So it was a faster, lighter playing Les Paul. Now unfortunately, Gibson had done all of this rebranding without letting Les Paul know. They just made a new guitar and slapped his name on it without talking to him. When Les Paul saw this new guitar bearing his name that was produced without his input, he was not a fan, to put it lightly. He did not like the looks of it, and of course it was made without any sort of input from him and bore his name. So yeah, not a great move by Gibson, but Les Paul was under contract until 1963. So from 61 to 63, these were considered Les Pauls and labeled with his name. Following after 1963, they were labeled SG, which is solid guitar, and yeah, the SG was born as we know it. Now in the mid-60s, the Les Paul went totally out of production, but it was reintroduced in the late 60s. And of course in the 70s, with rock and roll kind of hitting its stride, people using big amps and distortion, they needed a guitar with humbuckers. And yeah, this sort of found its niche again. It was no longer sort of thought of as an old man kind of jazz guitar. It sort of got a rebirth as a rock icon. So that's a brief history of these two instruments. Let's hit up some riffs. So we're going to be playing through the Blue Angel amp, mic'd up with a Sennheiser E906 mic, and we're going to be using various pedals to give us different amounts of gain. Let's start off with the neck pickup and a little bit of overdrive to give it that classic rock sound. All right, next up, let's stay on the neck pickup and play some clean arpeggios for you guys. Now let's jump to the bridge pickup and slam these guys with a ton of gain and see how these guitars handle that. Alright, now let's hit up the middle position with both humbuckers engaged and play a few little jazz chords for you guys. All right, let's head back to the bridge. We're going to use our Wampler triple rec to give a bunch of distortion again, and let's play another big riff. Now that you guys have heard the riff comparison, let's throw these guitars in a mix, because if you liked one guitar soloed, you might actually like the other one in a mix. It's always interesting to see how these guitars interplay with other instruments. Let's check it out. Some final thoughts on these two guitars. I think the rumors were correct. The SG sounded brighter, had a little bit more bite and a little bit more clarity, and Les Paul definitely had more frequencies in the lower mids, which gives it, a little bit of a rounder sound. So yeah, it was interesting. They definitely have their own unique tone. The SG is lighter and thinner, Obviously it has the double cutaway, so your thumb can get all the way up here. It doesn't stop you or force your hand into a weird angle like the Les Paul does. The neck is thinner and a little bit faster on the SG as well. The SG is totally mahogany, whereas obviously the Les Paul has the maple top. So a little bit different construction-wise, but both necks are mahogany with rosewood fingerboards. Now, while the SG doesn't have a full belly cut, it is nicely angled along the back and the front, so it sits up against your body in a nice way that the Les Paul doesn't. But what you do lose is that beautiful arch top of a Les Paul, so the front face of the SG is totally flat, and you don't get binding around the body and, you know, the fancy tops and stuff like that. You do get binding on the neck, which is nice, but not on the headstock or the body. And finally, we should talk about one of the biggest differences, and that's the price. And I think that's why the SG is Gibson's best-selling guitar. It's quite a bit cheaper than a Les Paul, so you can get into it for not a lot of money, and it still gives you great tone. Thanks so much for watching, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this demo. If you did, be sure to subscribe to the channel by clicking right here. The rest of my information will be on the screen. Have a fantastic week, you guys, and we'll see you next week with a new video. Take care.